Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe, columnist, syracuse.com, and we'd like to welcome those that are watching on our syracuse.com main Facebook page. We turn you guys on today because, in case you didn't hear, kind of a big deal. Jim Boeheim, no longer the head coach of Syracuse basketball after 47 years, over 1,000 wins, over 17,000 days on the job since taking over in 1976 after Syracuse lost to Wake Forest in the ACC tournament yesterday. Jim Boeheim at his press conference hinted he was done, said everything but he was done, deferring to the university several times. At about 5 o'clock on Wednesday, Syracuse University put out a statement saying that Jim Boeheim was no longer the head coach and Adrian Autry was. So what we wanted to do here on Orange Weekly, and welcome to those of you watching on Syracuse Orange Basketball, Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter as well. We do post this show later on syracuse.com as well. In case you miss it live, we're here Thursdays at noon Eastern time, streaming live. Your comments certainly welcome throughout this. And just what I wanted to do today is just kind of have an open forum, right? We're all taking this in. As much as this has been talked about, debated, and looked towards for years, frankly, at this point, the reality that Jim Boeheim is no longer the head coach at Syracuse basketball is incredible to think about. There's a lot that goes into it. There's still a lot of questions that have to be answered about this, and some questions that won't be answered ultimately till way down the road. Did they make the right call here? Is Adrian Autry the right choice? How it was handled yesterday, right? The legacy and thinking about Jim Boeheim, thanking Jim Boeheim for his time as Syracuse head coach, as complicated of a legacy as it was. I just wanted to open it up to you. Anything you want to talk about with anything that's happened with Jim Boeheim with this basketball season and where we sit now. So that's how it works here on Orange Weekly. We open it up to your comments and we just kind of respond to them. And let's go. Let's have an open forum. Let's see what you guys are saying. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen, as Scott leads us off today. Certainly have a lot to talk about today. Yeah, not a slow day by any stretch of the imagination. David says, hey, Brent, overcast day in more ways than one, right? Larry thinks it's sad how things went down yesterday for Syracuse. Antonio notes, I don't know how many PR people and professionals are part of the Syracuse program, but this was all handled clumsily and unprofessionally. Still, he'll be remembered well, and we'll always wish him the best. Matt says, bring in Mello. There you go. I mean, they already gave the job to Adrian Autry, but there is an assistant coach position open now, Matt, so that's a good suggestion. There's my guy, Brian, who says, so many thoughts and feelings, so much need for Brent Axe therapy. Yes, the regular joke on Orange Weekly here and on our post-game shows. For those of you watching on the syracuse.com main Facebook page, not familiar with it, Dr. Axe is in session here. I'm here for you to vent, to discuss, to all of this. Mike with a good question. What does that mean about Adam Weitzman's future support? Yeah, I think Adam Weitzman's in a pretty interesting spot there. Highlight your comment again there for a sec, Mike. Is his loyalty to Jim Boeheim, and we know how strong those two are and the bond that is there, or is Adam's commitment to what he has said it's been, Central New York, right? I do this for Central New York. I do this for the Syracuse community, bringing in the celebrities and raising money. And the recent last two home games in Syracuse, he brought in kids from the Make-A-Wish Foundation to sit courtside and get that royal treatment, right? Adam's been quiet thus far. It's only been 24 hours or so, but somebody's pretty active and has a very strong social media presence, has not commented yet. Maybe he's kind of taken it all in, and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made there. He's become Syracuse's lead booster. Elijah Moore, the commit that Syracuse got, class of 2024, certainly was a part of that process. Not the only reason he committed to Syracuse. Adam has been very involved in the NIL world here. Will that continue? That is a fair question. Everything on the table at this point. Scott wishes that Boeheim would put out a statement and clarify everything. Yeah, Scott, he had that opportunity yesterday. Let me comment on this for a second here, and I'll just keep highlighting some of your comments as I do it. I think both sides handled this about as badly as could be. We always knew this was probably going to end badly. Jim Boeheim has a lot of pride. He couldn't get it out of his mouth yesterday. He was not going to sit at a podium in Greensboro, North Carolina. And remember, he mocked Greensboro not too long ago in one of his many press conference moments over the years. and say this was it. But he certainly knew something was happening. He was certainly almost negotiating in public to get something from Syracuse. But as Tom notes here, it's sad and it's clumsy and it's awkward that after 47 years and everything that Jim Boeheim has accomplished, for better or worse, and Jim had some bad moments this year. I've written about it. I've talked about it, attacking the student reporters. The way that attacking is a strong word, going after the student reporters in the way that he did, which has happened for a number of years, but I think it was way out of bounds this year. The Pete Thamel interview and the multiple apologies and walkbacks that came from that. Like, Syracuse has been embarrassed by Jim, frankly, public relations wise a lot, but they've always tolerated it, right? It's just always been, oh, that's Jim. And then in the biggest decision you can make, this is the biggest decision Syracuse University can make. He is the front-facing, most public figure in the history of Syracuse University. And it all ends with a press release. Now, it takes two to tango, right? If Jim was just so defiant and just to the point where he was not going to step aside and he was going to put it all on the university, then the university made their decision. The fact they made that decision, put it out in a press release just 3 hours after that press conference, it just doesn't feel right. That's the way it went down, right? Was there a better way this could have been handled? You had years to prepare for this. They didn't stick the landing, but I guess, to be fair, this was always going to end in a clumsy manner because Jim, there's so much pride there. He was just never going to say, that's it for me, right? Someone else had to do it for him. Syracuse did it. Did they have to do it in that way? And by the way, what you have to look at here, folks, is the word retirement was not used in that press release. Ken Severeux, John Wildhack, Adrian Autry were quoted in that press release. Jim Boeheim was not. Now, was he given the opportunity and declined? Perhaps. Like, we don't know all the behind-the-scenes things, but when you do something of this magnitude, as a comment noted there, at one of the most noted communication schools in the world, communication is key. Yesterday was not a day for Ken Severeux to not speak to the public, for John Wildhack to not speak to the public. Now, Wildhack is going to have a press conference with Adrian Autry tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Carmelo Anthony Center. So we'll get the first public comments then. But I'm sorry, when you make a major decision like this, a press release and then silence is not the way to go. I don't blame Jim for not talking. I'm sure eventually he will and tell his side and reflect a little bit. I'm sure some celebrations are to come, and fans are already doing that just in droves on social media right now, thanking Jim Boeheim, even if you don't agree with, where the program has been, with Jim's antics, whatever the case may be, no matter where you stand on it, you have to appreciate what he has done for Syracuse basketball, for Syracuse University. He put it on the map. He put Syracuse, New York on the map for something other than snow. He built a college basketball program that is now synonymous with the sport. And that legacy is going to shine eternally in Syracuse, New York, no matter what. Right. So, man, the way that went down was, it was a shame. It was definitely a shame. But again, to be fair, Jim had every opportunity to control the narrative. He said it himself. I can retire when I want, but I'm going to leave this on the university. So clearly he wasn't ready to retire now. Otherwise, he just would have done it. But then he did the whole thing yesterday at the press conference where he was like, well, I gave my retirement speech on Saturday and only Father Payne picked up on it. It's like, come on, man, don't make us solve a puzzle here, right? Just, if you're going to do it, do it. If you didn't want to do it then, I think that, and kudos to Donna DeToda, my great colleague at syracuse.com, Hall of Famer in her own right, who I thought asked the right questions, followed up, pressed Jim a little bit here. Jim wouldn't commit to it, just kept deferring to the university, but strongly hinting that he was retiring, referred to his retirement speech on Saturday when the 2003 championship team was celebrated and Jerry McNamara and Hakeem Warwick's jerseys went in the rafters. It's like, is this the Da Vinci Code? I have to solve a puzzle here. Just tell us, right? Just tell us. So look, there's definitely some blame on Boeheim's side here. He was defiant right to the end, but both sides certainly can be pointed at here. And I feel like Syracuse University takes a little bit more of the blame in that sense. So I'll keep highlighting your comments here, guys. But let's ask another question here. What do you think about Adrian Autry taking over? I think we all kind of assumed, right, that it was either going to be Autry or Jerry McNamara. And we have not heard from Jerry McNamara up to this point, as I talked to you at 12:17 p.m. here Eastern time on Thursday, right? Somebody was going to be Pastor Payne, not Father Payne. Thank you, Susan, for correcting me there. Someone was going to be disappointed between those two. Jim Boeheim called my radio show just about a year ago. And this is when the Mike Krzyzewski retirement talk was in full force because he was on his way out at Duke and ended up going out in the Final Four. And it was a hell of a run at the end there for Mike Krzyzewski. But with all that in the air, and of course, another discussion about Jim Boeheim's retirement, which is now reality, and that's just weird to think about. Jim called my radio show and he indicated that there was a plan in place. Ironclad plan, in his words, for his succession. He wasn't going to tell me who it was or what it was, but that it was in place, right? So now that we know, now again, that was Jim's inference there. Maybe Syracuse went along with that plan, and that was their plan as well. Jim just revealed it publicly for the first time in that sense. Someone was going to be disappointed here. But Red Autry has been the associate head coach. He's been a part of this program, obviously, as a player dating back to the 1990s. One of the great guards Syracuse has ever seen, led Syracuse in assists 4 straight years. He's been a force on the recruiting front. He's been so well liked in the community, the players, the alums. I talked to a number of former players yesterday, both on the radio and off, and to a T, they all loved the move, and I think they would have loved Jerry as well. But Christine hits the nail on the head here with the question, how's he feeling about this? If you're Jerry McNamara, do you want to continue to serve as an assistant coach? Boy, he sounded like a head coach when he gave his speech on Saturday, an incredible speech after his jersey retirement at Syracuse, right? So someone was going to be disappointed between those two. You can't have co-head coaches. But what does Jerry do now? You know, Jerry bleeds orange. Jerry, I mean, we heard the speech and the dedication that was given to him and his obvious ties and love for Syracuse, New York. But I'm sure Jerry wants to be a head coach. And this was as good of an opportunity as it had been there. I wonder who Jim preferred. You know, Jim has never stated, as I noted, he brought up the plan. But one thing I'd like to hear from Jim is, who was your preference to take over? So you stay in the family. And guys and gals, being the guy after the guy at this job was always going to be a monumental task. Whoever took over for Jim Boeheim, if that was an assistant coach, if that was somebody from outside the family, if you will, that was a monumental task, right? So I feel that if you're going to do it, it's probably better to do it with an assistant coach, with somebody who's familiar with Syracuse, can sell Syracuse, who knows Syracuse. And look, in the short term, right, this is a long-term move. This is a huge macro move in terms of what Syracuse basketball is going to be post Jim Boeheim. In the micro, in the immediacy, guys, the transfer portal opens up on Monday, right? You've got to figure out who's coming back, who's not, with all these freshmen that Jim Boeheim coached for, as it turned out, one more year and came back to coach those 6 freshmen that he brought in. So who answers the siren song of the transfer portal? As Chris notes, maybe Ryan Blackwell comes in and GMAC will take another position elsewhere. We'll see if that's the case. There's only one recruit committed in the class of 2023. William Patterson, a 7'2" project. Marcus Adams just this week. It was weird. We thought he committed to UCLA, but then at the very last second commits to Kansas. Syracuse was in his final 3, along with those 2 schools. So the class of 2023 recruiting wise there's not a lot there. And part of that is because the roster is pretty stocked right now. It's hard to recruit backups. It's also hard to go into the transfer portal and say, hey, come to Syracuse where you'll be a backup, right? We could get some more clarity on this by Monday because now these players know who their coach is going to be. And they're taking this all in. They all committed to play for Jim Boeheim. I think they understand that they could have been on Jim Boeheim's last team. That's now a reality. Nobody that came into this program, particularly with all those freshmen, was under the illusion they'd play 4 years for Jim Boeheim, right? But it still hits home. It's still a big decision. And with the opportunity to go in the portal and get immediate playing time elsewhere, you take a risk in doing it, of course. But if you're talented enough, somebody is going to get you, and somebody is going to certainly give you the opportunity to play. Now that they know that it's Autry, and now that they know that he's back, how much of that roster can you keep together? thinking about Judah Mintz. Will he test the waters of the NBA and jump into the NBA draft? If he did, I don't think he'd get picked until late second round at this point. But hey, that's good enough for him. Then I completely understand it. As Jim notes, he thinks the portal has ruined college basketball at this point, right? So you got to bring back those players. Joe Girard and Jesse Edwards have another year of eligibility, right? What are their plans? Senior day was celebrated Saturday. It was as per the world we live in college basketball these days. It's a just in case senior day for a lot of people that are either have more eligibility due to that COVID exemption or guys that could go to the NBA like we talked about here. So in the short term, what kind of team are you going to have next year? And that would have been with Jim Boeheim or Red Autry, right? But now that it's Autry, how does that open some things up? And how does that close some other doors as well? So that is a big question. So I've been highlighting some of your comments here, guys, and talking about Red taking over and, just to consider something else here. If this had been handled differently, and this was a touch and go situation for all involved, but if this had been handled a little differently and you zoomed out, right? National search. This is a prime job. Okay. I know you're in the shadow of Jim Boeheim, but listen, you're in the ACC. The JMA Wireless Dome is one of the great recruiting tools in the country, 35,000 plus at some of the bigger games, which frankly we had not seen in recent years, short of a couple of games here and there, but still a great crowd, still as enthusiastic a college basketball fan base as you're going to find in the country. You have one of the best practice facilities in the country in the Carmelo K. Anthony Center, right? This is a big job. It's a plum job. Now, the trick with Syracuse is Jim Boeheim, this is going to sound weird because the man's a millionaire several times over. But when it came to paying Jim Boeheim, he was pretty cheap on the market. And to Jim's credit, he took less money a lot to ensure his assistant coaches got the money. He made money elsewhere. He was well compensated in endorsements and Nike money and media opportunities. So Syracuse only had to pay, and I say only, I'd love to know what it's like to live off of this, but he only made $2 million a year that are abouts as the head coach of this team. Look at the highest paid coaches in college basketball. You're talking about 5, 6, 7 million a year, right? So if Syracuse zoomed out and brought in now you can maybe get and I'm just going to use an example here, like a Matt Langle from Colgate, who has done just a phenomenal job with the resources at Colgate. Yet another NCAA tournament berth, yet another opportunity for Colgate here. They've beaten Syracuse 2 years in a row. And what he is doing with the resources he has there, thinking about the resources he would have at Syracuse, right? Matt Langle's not a guy you'd have to pay $5, $6, $7 million a year. But if you went big name route, I don't know, Jay Wright or Rick Pitino or something of that nature, you got to shell out the bucks. So Adrian Autry, I would imagine, is going to make about what Jim Boeheim made, right thereabouts. So how much was this a financial consideration as well? So that's out there. A lot of things about what's happened here just in the past day or two in this season. But the reflections are going to start to really zoom out beyond that and really think about Boeheim's legacy. As complicated as it was, I think a lot of people were bothered by how this went down, right? Because through it all, through the press conference moments, through the combative nature, through some mishaps off the court, some personal tragedies that we all watched Jim go through. I mean, think of the tragic accident just a couple of years ago. We watched Jim go through cancer. We watched Jim go through the Bernie Fine situation, right? NCAA investigations twice, including just as recently as 2015. And even the year after that, when Syracuse got placed, put itself on sanctions, took itself out of all postseason play, and the NCAA eventually swooped in. The Mike Hopkins succession plan that never came to be, right? They made the Final Four in 2016, right? All these years recently where, the Dick Vitales of the world, the Doug Gottliebs of the world, the national media would yell and scream that Boeheim and Syracuse don't belong in the tournament. and they'd make a run to the Sweet 16 or the Final Four. They did that in 2016. They did that in 2018. They did that in 2021, right? By the way, all opportunities for Jim to have gone out riding off into the sunset, right? I'm not saying he should have done that, but there were several off ramps off the highway where we would not be having this conversation today, right? Walk away, Final Four, walk away, Sweet 16, whatever the case may be. Even that 2021 year where he got to coach Buddy, not Jimmy. Jimmy came a year later, but there was better off ramps here. But man, Jim is so competitive, right? And I can't relate to this. I'm not a coach, but I do have the great opportunity in doing this job as a columnist at syracuse.com, as a radio host here locally, that I love my job. And those of you that are out there watching today that love your job and the feeling you get from that, the juice you get from that, to use a term here, right? There's nothing like it. Jim is the most competitive person I think I've ever covered and will ever cover. If you think about Jim's life and, read up about Jim when he was younger, growing up in Lyons, New York, and how competitive he was with his father, how competitive a person his father was just in life, let alone playing basketball in the driveway, playing board games, playing card games, right? His parents were fierce, I believe, bridge players, if I'm not mistaken. And that drive that Jim has still exists to this day. And where I can sympathize with Jim in not wanting to walk away is I don't think there's anything in his life that can compare to that. Now, Jim's got a great life, right? He's got a beautiful family, just bought a $5 million estate on Skinny Atlas Lake. And like we said, he's been well compensated for this job. It's always funny how Jim's been one of the more surly, miserable people at times in Syracuse when he should be the happiest, considering the job he has, the money he makes, the beautiful family is, all those things, right? But that's just Jim. That's how he's been. And he's always been just cranky Uncle Jim, right? So all that said, there's only so much golf you can play. There's only so much you can do with that money. There's only so much you can do that just does not compare to coaching. And Jim set a standard here, right? In that for 8 months out of the year, now I'm talking about living here in central New York, you're probably watching from all over the country today. And I always enjoy hearing from different people on this show from all over the place, even internationally, as we're streaming on the web here. And you never know where people are dropping in from, right? But here in Syracuse, as Jim Boeheim has said and has been quoted numerous times, for 8 months out of the year, the weather's beautiful. Life's good, right? And then the other 4 months of the year, it's basketball season. And the mentality that Jim Boeheim has there during basketball season, 4 or 5 month run, his head's down, he's focused, he's competitive. It's all about hoops. It's all about the next game. He'll make his media appearances in between then. Sometimes he'll be a little combative in those situations. But at the end of it, it was because he had his mind on the next game. After the season, Jim enjoyed Central New York as much as anybody. And one thing you've really got to appreciate about Jim Boeheim is the man is the head general in the Army defending Central New York. There's that famous story how he was, I believe they were in Hawaii. I don't think it was Julie. I think it was Jim and his ex-wife, but it was Jim and Patino and they're sitting on the beach and everybody's talking about, where would they want to live in the world, right? Anywhere in the world. And people are talking about different locations, Paris and, all these exotic locales. And Jim Boeheim said Syracuse, New York, right? Because for 8 months of the year, as we noted, the weather's just like Hawaii. And the other 4 months, I'm working. It's basketball season. That mentality that we took, right? Because in Syracuse, New York, when it's basketball season, our heads are down. The weather stinks. It's winter. You just kind of grind through it. And then you look up one day, middle of March or something, you're like, oh, hey, we made it through another winter. And Syracuse basketball for so long was the anchor that did that. And I hope we'll continue to do that under Coach Autry, right? And the 8 months of the year where the weather's beautiful, Central New Yorkers take advantage of it. We get outside, we golf, we go to the lakes around here, we go to the concerts, we do, I can list a million things that's great about Central New York. So look, we'll go to that Bruce Springsteen show September 7th. I'm sure Boeheim will be there for that. Let's go, baby. But that's what I've always appreciated about Boeheim is his love for Central New York knows no bounds. And what he's done for Central New York, charity work, obviously, is incredible, right? So I think that needed to be said as well. I'm going to hide behind this comment a little bit here. Where'd Brent go? Todd says, couldn't agree more. Boeheim made this a poor ending. He had a much better way he could have handled this, almost like he needed to go out and acted in the press conference. Autry's a good guy, but Colgate is where they should have been shopping for players and fans. I hope it works. Brian agrees there, saying, me too. Andrew jumps in. They should put a jersey next to Hakeem, McNamara, and Melo up in the win total. The real win total, not the NCAA win total. I love it. I mean, Jim Boeheim's had every accolade you could get short of a statue at Syracuse. The court's named after him. He's a Hall of Famer, the most famous name in Central New York. But I love that idea, actually. The real win total for Jim Boeheim, not the ridiculous NCAA, let me randomly take away 101 wins that nobody ever saw. Poof, it's a magic trick, right? And how ridiculous that is. There is a new president for the NCAA who just took over recently, Charlie Baker. He's formerly the governor of Massachusetts. So hopefully you want to win some points there, governor, give Jim Boeheim his wins back, right? Nan says, no fanfare, but common decency and respect for both coaches. There you go. Jill says, maybe another reason he stayed. Can't take those wins away. He's over the 1,000 mark again. Yeah, the only coach in basketball history to win 1,000 games twice. Let's see. Courtney notes they better retire his number next year, right? I mean, Boeheim's got the court named after him. That's pretty good, but there's no shortage of accolades you can give Jim Boeheim for what he has done and what his tenure represents at Syracuse. And look, some people don't like his approach. They don't like his press conference demeanor. They don't like his surliness. Jim never cared about that. Love him or hate him, he is who he is, right? And there was just something endearing about that, as much as like I've been in Jim Boeheim's crosshairs as much as anybody, right? But there's just something endearing. It's almost a badge of honor. You know, I have the great opportunity now. I'm fortunate. It also means I'm older, but I get to teach at Syracuse now, and I get to mentor a lot of young broadcasters and a lot of young journalists. And whenever Jim calls them out at a press conference, I always make sure to reach out as much as I can. I'm not batting 1,000 on this, but the students that I've had and some of these great young broadcasters and journalists up at Newhouse, the next time I see them, I try to say something pretty simple to them, right? Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. It's a badge of honor when Jim Boeheim calls you out. Now, you went over the line this year with a couple of those press conference moments. And, you know, my thing about that is when Jim's in that press conference, I was talking about the juice earlier and the competitiveness. And think about some of those moments that he had earlier this year. He's still in the fight, right? Some of those close games, the losses to Miami and North Carolina, and some of those games earlier this year, when Jim is still in the fight and that edge is there, it's going to come out. Think of the 4-game losing streak when they were getting trucked, honestly, by an average of 19 points to end the season. Those 4 games, they beat Wake Forest, lose to Wake Forest. So they lost 5 of their last 6. But Jim was humble. Jim was calm. He was accommodating. He was polite. Like Jim knew, like, I can't be Mr. Combative, nana boo-boo here, right? They win the Wake Forest game. Great day. Everybody's having this amazing day. And Jim being Jim, in this particular case, called out sports radio, right? None of the people here call sports radio shows, which was easily something to deny. Like I could name him 15 people off the top of my head that I know were at that game, are season ticket holders, and call sports radio, right? But right to the end, you know, Jim had something on his chest. He was going to tell you about it. And we're talking kind of like media stuff here, media insider stuff. But let me tell you something as a member of the media, okay, that I will always appreciate about Jim. And before I was a member of the media, okay, I grew up here. I was a fan. I was sitting in those stands with my dad we were season ticket holders, right? I mean, I've got so many memories of games. If I start listing them, we'll be here forever, right? then I had the opportunity to, go to college and get into the media business. And Syracuse, New York, like Jim Boeheim, okay, and this is something I think I'll always share with Boeheim. This is the only place I've ever wanted to be, right? I've had opportunities to go to other markets. I did work for an NFL broadcast team for 3 years. I worked for the Buffalo Bills radio network, but this is the only place I've ever wanted to be. This is all that's ever felt big to me when I was a kid growing up and following Jim Boeheim. He's the only coach I've ever known, guys. I'm 44 years old. He's been the coach here 47 years. I don't know any other coach. I do not know any other coach. And I speak for a lot of people there. And even those of you that remember Roy Danforth or remember Syracuse basketball before Jim Boeheim, you kind of have to squint a little bit, right, to see those memories, okay? So now getting into the media business and seeing the media side of things. What I will always appreciate about Jim Boeheim is Jim Boeheim was accessible. He'd pick up your phone call. There was no hard feelings. He'd call you out the next day. He'd talk to you. Jim Boeheim in an open locker room. There are so many people in sports today that the only access you get is a not condensed, that's not the right word, a sanitized podium, right? Coach, 3 players at a podium, whatever the case may be. Everybody gets the same answers, and it doesn't serve our audience the way it should. To be frank, to be honest with you, right? Neil wants to talk about next year. We will certainly get to that, my friend. Suzanne, watching from Orlando, but originally from Oswego. There you go. What was I saying there? Anyway, so Jim had an open locker room. Jim, look, sometimes he didn't tell you what you wanted to hear, but he would tell you what you need to hear, right? He didn't just speak from his ivory tower and hide. He was as accessible a coach from a media standpoint as you could get. You know what else he was? He was a member of this community, right? Think of the titan that Jim Boeheim is for a lot of people. You could see him in the produce aisle at Wegmans. You could see him at Joey's. He did his radio show every Thursday night at different places. Delmonico's. Now he does it at Carrabba's here locally. It's always Italian food, Jim's favorite, right? You could just hang out with him every Thursday. Throw on a headset. Talk sports. Call him on his radio show. Like, how accessible are your, in essence, your heroes, right? If you live in a pro sports town, how often are you going to see, Josh Allen in Buffalo having wings? Maybe here and there, right? But he was just so enwrapped in this community and will continue to be enwrapped in this community the way that he was. So again, that's something that I'll appreciate in what Jim has done. I really will appreciate that. We had our disagreements. I felt like it was time to move on. I just felt like it ran its course. And the program is just not living up to Jim's own standards that he set, and he fought to the end and tried to fix it. And Jim Boeheim would always think he's the answer to the question, and will always want to coach, and will always want to be the guy to turn things around. But as much as the university made the right decision, in my opinion, man, as we talked about earlier in the show, and you guys have been commenting, they just handled this wrong. They just completely handled this wrong. And I don't think people are going to forget that, right? Okay, a few more comments and questions for you. Really appreciate this, guys. I appreciate you saying that, Anthony. Sav says Syracuse won't win another game with him coaching. Okay. Let's see. Bernie, love you too, baby. Appreciate that. Jamie says, in Ohio, but born and raised in Liverpool, Cuse will always have a place in my heart. In my 40 years, I've only ever known one coach. Man, think about that. I don't know this to be sure, but I'm fairly certain that there is no longer association from someone who was a player who became a coach in collegiate athletics, right? Joe Paterno was at Penn State forever, but he didn't go to Penn State. And I mean, that list is short, that people that have made it this far. And I mean, guys, think about how lucky we are. Love or hate Jim Boeheim, agree or disagree with Jim Boeheim. We saw one person coach for 47 years at his alma mater. That's just never going to happen again, right? Think of the coaches that have walked away in recent years. Mike Krzyzewski, Jim Boeheim, Roy Williams, Jay Wright. There's like 11 national championships in that group. I just don't think we're going to see this again. I don't think we're going to see something like this ever again, right? So when we look back and we reflect and we retire, whatever the case may be, we're going to say we saw that. We're going to say I was lucky enough to witness that, right? Something to think about as well. David says, walking on in 1961 and never left, right? Linda wants to know my perspective on the athletic director. Look, John Wildhack was always going to be in an interesting spot here and what he did and what his choice would be. I think Autry's the safe move. I think Autry's the move that the administration beyond Wildhack wanted. And if Wildhack wanted to be bold and take Syracuse in a different direction, he would have done a national search and he would have found a lot of great candidates to do it. It's interesting that the hires that John has made, think of Kayla Trainer for Syracuse women's lacrosse, Gary Gate for Syracuse men's lacrosse, alums. John Wildhack is an alum and knows that perspective and knows what it's like to have skin in the game, right? John is somebody who, look, he worked at ESPN forever. He's good at the PR game in the sense of, kind of giving you, it's hard to crack an honest answer out of John Wildhack. He knows how to play that PR game. I don't think this has been handled well so far. We'll see what he says tomorrow. But this is John Wildhack's moment. This is his biggest moment. This is the biggest move he can make. Now, traditionally, the biggest move you can make at a university as an athletic director is the football coach. And by the way, Wildhack might have to make that decision this year. Can you imagine if one calendar year, the Syracuse University men's basketball coach and the Syracuse football coach are both replaced? It's entirely possible, right? But we'll save that conversation for down the road. But athletic directors are in a position to do a number of things, but the two biggest things are fundraising and hiring and firing. Now, Syracuse has actually done a pretty good job at fundraising. The John Lally complex that they're building on, the donations they've gotten there, some recent big donations from football players. John Wildhack now has to try to salvage this relationship with Adam Weitzman because Weitzman is directly tied to Boeheim, I think more than Syracuse, right? So I think it's interesting the position that John is in. And he's kind of just been, riding the wave so far, not a lot of bumps, doesn't really say anything in terms of being controversial. I've certainly disagreed with some things that John has done, but I always appreciate his perspective and his accessibility at times, right? But guys, this is going to define him. This is his legacy, right? You made the choice to move on from Jim Boeheim and go to Adrian Autry. That is going to define John Wildhack's legacy more than anything, more than the money he raised, more than the facilities, the change over to the JMA Wireless Dome, things I'm forgetting off the top of my head here. This is going to define him. That's a great question. I appreciate you asking that at this point. Clifford says, I followed Syracuse since he recruited Roosevelt Bowie from my hometown. JB's the best, going to miss him. Clifford had the opportunity yesterday to talk to Roosevelt Bowie. And man, it was getting dusty in that room. Hearing him tell the story. Remember Louis and Bowie, the first recruits, Rick Pitino, helping Jim Boeheim bring him in. Incredible to think about that. And right up till yesterday. Question from Terry. Did Jim get fired or did he resign? Look, Terry, it's a fair question because that press release said it's what it didn't say, actually. Retirement. Jim said it's the university's decision. Less than 3 hours after that press conference yesterday, after Syracuse lost to Wake Forest, press release is out. Jim Boeheim's no longer the coach. The word retirement was not in there. Thus far, to this point, we have not heard from Boeheim, right? That's a question John Wildhack's going to have to answer tomorrow, and he'll dance around it, but they have to speak to this, and I think they have to be transparent about it, right? Just tell us what happened and why. It was messy. You bungled it. Now clean up the mess. Right. And this was never going to end well. This was never going to end well. I think you've had a lot of time to prepare for this. It certainly, the effort could have been made, and I'm sure it was in some ways, but there's some questions that have to be answered there. Good questions from all. This is interesting too. How did the team find out? It moves so fast, Catherine, that Mike Waters and Donna Ditota in the locker room yesterday in Greensboro, like Judah Mintz, Judah wasn't on the podium, but Judah was asked in the press conference, what are you talking about? Right? Like a lot of the players wait, what? Like they weren't in the press conference. Benny Williams was in the press conference. And I forget the other player that was there. I think it was Jesse. even they were saying, well, what are you talking about? What's going on here? Right. So they learned pretty much the way all of us did as it happened in real time yesterday. Right. As Dan notes, poor job handling the move. Black eye for the university. Michael Antonio, did Jim choose Autry as his successor, and can Red recruit at a top level? Red has done some great job some on the recruiting trail. Judah Mintz, notably, for players recently. Mike Waters wrote a great piece about Autry that I would encourage you to read that lists a bunch of the recruits that Autry has brought in. I think the challenge that Autry is going to have is name recognition, right? He's been out there. He's well known in the New York City area, in the Washington area, the AAU circuit. But Jim Boeheim was a Hall of Famer. Jim Boeheim was a draw in college sports. The biggest draw you can get, and facilities are important. Obviously, winning is important. NIL money is a factor now, but college basketball is the coaches. Okay, you're playing for Jim Boeheim. You're playing for Bill Self. You're playing for Mike Krzyzewski. You're playing for Jay Wright. And I know some of those names have moved on, but you get my point, right? Jim Boeheim was a draw just by that. Autry and GMAC and Alan Griffin would go out there and recruit and do the dirty work and go to the tournaments and talk to these guys. But Jim Boeheim was the closer. Jim Boeheim would swoop in, boom, nail down the deal, right? He still carried weight there, right to the end. So I think that's the thing that Autry is going to have to overcome, and it's not fair. And anybody in Boeheim's shadow would finish second in that competition. But Red knows where to go to find talent. He certainly is a great coach. The biggest question of all, here we are 42 minutes into this, and I appreciate you guys hanging out here and being patient here. 42 minutes into this, we haven't even asked one of the biggest questions. Is Red Autry going to run man-to-man or zone? That will certainly be asked tomorrow. So we'll find out, right? All right, a couple more from you guys here, then we'll wrap it up. Do you think that Red will follow Boeheim's way of coaching or go in a different direction? Suzanne, I think it'll be a hybrid of the two. How could you not be influenced by Boeheim after all this time playing and coaching with him? But I'm sure Red's got some of his own ideas. The biggest question, as we noted, being the defense there. Let's see. Sounds like Boeheim's contract was up. Syracuse moved to the succession plan. Boeheim sounded like he still wanted to coach and be given another year extension. We don't know when the contract was up. I'm fairly certain it was either this year or next year. I'm not sure which one it was, but it was definitely up, because things happen at deadlines, contracts. It gave Syracuse an out, happened to coincide with, another season that's not up to standard. So they made the break. Not a clean break, but they made the break nonetheless. Big PR fumble for our college with the Hale Newhouse School. Antonio notes Syracuse didn't really play zone until 94. Since then, it's been exclusive. Great point there, Antonio. 94, by the way, when Adrian Autry was playing at Syracuse. Doug says, followed Syracuse since Boeheim was a brand new coach, given his personality. I don't think there was any clean way to move on from him, but it had to be done. And we'll end on this note. Scott, thank you, sir, for giving the fans a voice. Hope you enjoy your summer. Now, Scott, I appreciate those sentiments, and it's nice to think about summer, looking out my window in another gray, drab winter day here in central New York. But this broadcast that we do here, Orange Weekly, we're going to keep going Thursdays at noon. Now, for those of you that are watching right now on the syracuse.com main Facebook page, we don't always turn on this channel. So make sure you like the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page. Make sure you find us on YouTube, Syracuse Orange Sports on syracuse.com. Follow me on Twitter at Brent Axe Media. So when we stream live Thursdays at noon Eastern time, you can be a part of this show. If you miss it, want to watch later, we put up a post on syracuse.com. It automatically archives on all of our social media channels. So easy to catch up if you missed the show. But Thursdays at noon is when we're live and we can participate with you guys and get some great interaction as we did today. Appreciate you coming by, ladies and gentlemen. The future of Syracuse basketball, day one of the Adrian Autry era after 17,000 plus days under Jim Boeheim. It's going to be fascinating to see where we go from here. Appreciate you coming by today. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend here, even with Syracuse basketball out of the mix. Lacrosse takes full center stage now. Congratulations to Mike Powell, who will get his 22 jersey up in the rafters at the Dome on Saturday. And We'll be talking plenty about that, but certainly the Boeheim story is going to command a lot of oxygen here for the days and weeks to come. But thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your great comments and questions here today. This has been another awesome episode of Orange Weekly presented by Crouse Health. We'll talk to you guys